back to where you came from, you Negroes. We don't want you here. You and your kind are all dirty, lazy filth that pollute our land. We have had enough. You all sit at home on welfare, pimp your daughters, and steal. Leave now or we will kill you. Your kind are as good as dead. All of you will burn in hell.
These threats were sent by letter to Robert Tashir and his family. At that time, Robert was living in the Czech city of Pilsen. He was a prosperous and successful businessman, a father of 2 girls. Now he is a refugee, struggling to make a living in Vancouver. Why would anybody want to harm an upstanding family like the Tashirs? For one simple reason. Robert and his family are gypsies, or as they prefer to be called, Roma.
My father was a true Roma. In respect to where they live, even today, the Roma are segregated in small communities outside towns or villages. I could have lived the rest of my life there. You get used to the conditions there, you become desensitized and get used to it. But I told myself I must save my children so that one day they wouldn't say to me, "Why didn't you take us out of there?"
Few people have been as discriminated against as the Roma have. In the Middle Ages, gypsies were tortured and executed simply because they were gypsies. During World War II, they were the only group, aside from Jews, who were murdered by the Nazis simply because of their race. And now, neo-Nazis have attacked and murdered scores of European Roma.
In the history of Roma, always they become a scapegoat when there is some change, and when the society doesn't know how to solve their own problems, the Roma are blamed.
The wars are still going on today. I'm thinking of the history of the Roma, starting with their departure from India. It's a history of a nation that has suffered oppression. They had to put forth a great effort to preserve their identity to the present.
Part of that effort included establishing the Roma Cultural Museum in the Czech city of Brno, a center devoted to Romani expression and history.
They look like Indians, many of them. Then they have their own specific culture, which is very influenced by the Indian origin. They have their own language, Romani, which is also very similar to Hindi and other Indian languages.
The origins of the Roma can be traced to northwestern India. There they lived either on the outskirts of society or as a specific caste. In the 10th century, for reasons that remain obscure, the Roma left India, traveling first to Persia and then to Byzantine Greece. There they remained for some 300 years. Fleeing invasions by the Turks, they pushed into the Balkans. By 1300, they had arrived in southeastern Europe. Because the Roma had accepted Christianity, they were at first welcomed as refugees from the infidels. Yet within a century, they met fierce prejudice.
They look partly or was similar in the dark faces with the Turks or Arabs, and it was enemies for the white Christian which live in the Central Europe. From these roots, then started prejudice connecting with Roma to our days.
It wasn't only the Roma's dark complexion that alarmed white Europeans. Strange rituals involving cleanliness, mysterious healing powers, even the amazing ability to tame snakes, all contributed to the fear of gypsies.
All these things brought the suspicion that they were heretics. and as a result, the church treated them as such.
In the Middle Ages, the tightly controlled craft guilds of Western Europe closed their doors to Roma, forcing them to travel from village to offer services as blacksmiths, fortune tellers, and musicians.
The need to survive was first in importance. If they couldn't find markets for their goods, if they couldn't beg for enough money to feed their families, then they would resort to stealing. One must add that they usually didn't steal anything big, only for their immediate purposes and needs.
The stereotype of the dirty, thieving, lying gypsy took root. It thrives to this day.
The characteristics are in us. They see them. They see I'm not a genuine Czech. They see that. I say the Roma like to eat, yes? When they go shopping, for example, they fill a cart full, but I've noticed it doesn't sit very well with the Czechs. They think you've stolen something and they just don't get it. It's just rooted there.
From the 14th to 18th centuries, the Roma were victimized even more. In Romania, gypsies became slaves. In Germany, they could be executed without trial because their way of life was prohibited. And in what is now the Czech Republic, they were declared outlaws, literally outside and unprotected by the law.
In those times, all Roma across Central and Eastern Europe could face punishment even if they appeared to so much as walk like a gypsy. And basically meant that, to take one example, Rom entering the Czech kingdom were automatically considered to be in violation of the law. And if they were apprehended, the men were immediately hanged without due process. The women were flogged and whipped, and the word expelled was branded on their skin before they were banished. They were told they would be put to death if they ever returned.
Until the mid-19th century, one vicious campaign after another was waged against the Roma. Yet the harsh laws that resulted were often not enforced. Governments were not strong enough or police forces big enough. The Roma survived. Indeed, there were many who eluded persecution altogether. These were the so-called protected gypsies, who lived on the estates of aristocratic landowners.
This is something which is very interesting and which many people don't realize yet, is that in much of Central Europe, the Roma, they were not nomadic. They were settled. The Roma, they were mostly under the protection of local feudal lords. They performed services for the feudal lords in order to earn a keep. They worked as stable boys. They worked as blacksmiths. Also, there's this very early association between Roma and blacksmithing.
In the 19th century, as the Industrial Revolution spread throughout Europe, the Roma, both those traveling in caravans and those working on estates, lost ground economically.
Industrialization came, and the Roma didn't fit in with their outdated skills and trades. They couldn't keep up. The blacksmiths were producing, but very primitive products. The horse handlers had horses, but their methods were perceived as fraudulent and therefore didn't fit the market. So in general, industrialization caused them to lag behind, and they were impoverished.
Následkem toho ta populace teda chudla a pauperizovala.
The Roma may have been poor, but their culture remained vibrant and rich, so much so that they enlivened the societies they lived in.
Only Roma musicians were playing music, were doing music. In Hungary, they were Roma who were playing at the courts of the kings, at the coronation of kings. So they're very, very, very famous musicians.
Robert Tashir's ancestors are examples. His grandfather and father received no formal education. They were illiterate, yet they were both fine musicians. Both played the violin beautifully. This is the village where Robert's ancestors lived, probably for centuries. It's called Čermerne, located in eastern Slovakia.
It was like the old times. Everything was under straw. Sometimes there was a little tin on the roofs of the huts. They were built out of sod or wood. No electricity at all. Only oil lamps and candles were used.
The house of Robert's family still stands in this village. His father, Jura, was born here. He died in 1993, but his sister remembers their desperate childhood.
When we were small children, we had a small two-room house. We owned one set of clothing for every day and one set for Sundays. We had to share one pair of shoes. There was no laundry or ironing, nothing like that. None of my family went to school. Neither I nor my brother. He learned a little in the army, but he was basically illiterate. It was because I was Roma, I wasn't allowed to go to school. That was the reason.
In the 1920s and 30s, Roma children were allowed to work for neighboring farmers, but they received no money, only a little food.
My father told us that it was a very hard life, that it was very difficult to work strictly for food. He was treated horribly, and if he dared to say something, he would be beaten with a whip, and that was very common in those days.
Antonia Chadrabova is Robert Tashir's mother. She remembers her late husband crying while he talked of his troubled childhood.
He had to work. He had to keep an eye on the cattle and feed the chickens. Strictly for food, never for money. As a little boy, he suffered terribly there. Often had to steal food to bring to his parents.
Poverty and starvation were a way of life for many of Eastern Europe's Roma. But in the 1930s, things would become even more grave. During the 1930s, Europe's Roma faced increasing danger. In Germany, Roma were fingerprinted, their travel was restricted, and many were sent to so-called rehabilitation camps. After the Nazis came to power in 1933, a law was passed allowing legal sterilization of categories of people, including the Roma. Called habitual criminals, they were sent to concentration camps by the thousands.
The riddance of Roma was a popular notion. The general society considered them criminals. The Nazis promised to get rid of them, and that was a very welcome act.
In the fall of 1938, the infamous Munich Pact, signed by Germany, France, Italy, and Britain, transferred the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia to Germany. The following March, German troops occupied Bohemia and Moravia. The Czech